Hello, John.
Hey, George, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I've souped up my end of the operation here a little bit.
Please describe.
Well, first of all, I took a neuroenhancer this morning.
A neuroenhancer? Really?
Yeah.
Wow, which one?
Excedrin Extra Strength really works for me. Have you ever tried it? It really kicks ass. It's got I don't know if it's ibuprofen or aspirin or one of the painkillers.
Yeah, it's ephedrine, isn't it?
Pardon? What is it?
Isn't it an ephedrine?
Well, maybe it's that too, but it's also got a big dose of caffeine. So.
Oh, okay.
I like to take it before I play hockey. I've done that for years, and it just makes me feel like a young man again. And
really?
I took it recently.
Well, it's all just like it's all just parasympathetic nervous system stimulants, right?
I'm not sure I know what that means, George.
Oh, well, there's the parasympathetic and the central nervous system. So, the really effective stuff, the amphetamines, is a CNS stimulant, and things like ephedrine and caffeine, or I'm pretty sure caffeine or PNS, parasympathetic nervous. Because I remember for a while when this was probably back in the 80s, there were these stores that started springing up in university towns, and they would sell some of this stuff, and they would mold it so it was shaped like pharmaceutical Benzedrine tablets.
Uh-huh.
And they weren't actually, misrepresenting it. They were saying what it was, but of course a lot of people, didn't really make the distinction, and so it was like you take these things, and mostly they just make your scalp feel really itchy, and you'd feel kind of tingly, and maybe your heart would race. So, but it didn't really get to the core of your brain, like a Benzedrine.
Well, amphetamines.
It's a lot better for you too.
Oh, jeez. I've got a lot of noise here this morning.
What is it? Oh, it's a telephone.
Jesus, I just unplugged the thing and it's still ringing. How can that be, George?
Wireless.
Yeah, but the receiver. Oh, I think it's my.
All kinds of things are beeping at you.
Well, that's my fax machine now.
Oh, okay.
All right, it just went off. And also, I have somebody doing construction downstairs for me.
Oh, great.
Oh, well. But that's part
I thought maybe you'd set an alarm clock to remind you of when to record Science Saturday.
No, I don't really. I don't need that.
One of those mechanical kinds, with the brass bells that you wind up.
I don't use a.
That's what it sounded like.
I don't use an alarm clock because my problem is not sleeping late. It's waking up too early. It's old man's disease, I think.
Yeah.
Well, so in addition to a neuroenhancer, and I do highly recommend that Excedrin Extra Strength. I mean, like I said, I think it's just caffeine, but for some reason that package, the analgesic plus the caffeine, really works well for me, and not just doesn't make me just feel good physically for sports and so forth, but it just spruces up my mind a little bit, gets the synapses firing a little more quickly, or at least it makes me feel that way.
I think it's probably some of that's illusory. But
oh, absolutely.
Then again, if it works, what's it called again?
Excedrin. I should have it here to hold up. Extra Strength. I think it's the same as Excedrin Migraine, and it's got caffeine. That's the extra ingredient.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I've got here, and this is something that's old hat for you, but I got a new computer. I got a laptop given to me by my school because my old laptop is making a grinding noise, and it takes about a half hour to boot up in the morning.
Oh, that's usually a bad sign.
Yeah. So I convinced them that
you want to have backed up.
Yeah. Well, I've definitely been backing up. But now, so I'm actually recording this on my old laptop, and I've got my new one right over here, and I can web surf and find backup information. for our chats.
Hey, great.
Like you have in the past.
So you're wired.
Yeah, I'm totally wired.
That sounds good. I was just looking up, here we go, drug facts. Yeah.
You're looking up
a lot of aspirin, a lot of caffeine, and a lot of acetaminophen.
What's the last? Oh, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, pain reliever.
I'm just gonna pull out.
It's an inhibitor of prostaglandin H synthase.
I'm just pulling out plugs here. So much for my new and improved method. Man.
It's got a benzene ring and a hydroxyl group, and
that's good. I need it all.
Hey, I've been playing with another product placement for what we don't get paid. Looking at the molecular structure for acetaminophen reminded me that I got a copy of Steve Wolfram's Mathematica.
Ah, why?
They put out something called the Mathematica Home Edition, and I got this email saying that I only had like 7 more days to get Mathematica Home Edition for a $50 discount. I think I got it for $249 instead of $299.
What the hell?
Apparently does everything that Mathematica Pro does, but it's only licensed for one computer. And you can do things like put in names of different molecules and get these just beautiful 3-dimensional renderings, and then you can rotate them around and look at them at different angles with your mouse.
George, you make
That's
me
just
feel,
one of the many things you can do.
You make me feel like a total fraud and imposter when you talk like that.
Well, I don't know what half of this stuff is. It's just fun to play with, and Mathematica, costs thousands of dollars. So the fact that for a few hundred I could get it, it's the first time I think I've ever succumbed to an email advertisement.
Thousands.
I probably got on their list when I. When I interviewed Wolfram on Blogging Heads.
Thousands of
Plus
dollars?
I met him out a couple times, but...
wow, I had no idea.
Basically, I got spam from Wolfram, but it was welcome spam, and I bought it.
I had no idea Mathematica was that expensive. Of course, there's no reason why.
Oh, yeah. It's absolutely amazing program. I'm just kind of calling up some stuff I did here.
Well, as a scientist...
Okay, let's listen to this. Okay, I took this equation. It's the sine of 700t plus 100t times sine 350t.
Yikes.
With t varying between 0 and 4. And then so you can type out an equation like this and then immediately get this really cool looking 3D graph. Mm-hmm. Or in this case, it's not a 3D graph, but it's just a 2D graph. And then you can put that in brackets and then write play. And so here's what that equation sounds like.
Oh, come on. You just did that with your mouth.
Wait, let me just find one more thing that was... It helps when these are... Yeah, I guess that's the only thing I have that's actual audio, but then you can do cellular automata, and
sure.
Game of Life stuff.
Well, I think some brilliant person said that the entire universe is just one big cellular automaton.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, that was Wolfram, right? Well, and also Fredkin and Bob, our leader Bob Bright writes about that. Again, another product placement in his first book, Three Scientists and Their Gods. Here's a really neat thing. You can plot these sinusoidal functions in 2 dimensions. Yeah, like tangent 2x plus sine y. That looks like just totally wild. And then you get this really colored, cool-looking 3D graph. I mean, it's of course in 2 dimensions really, but it looks 3D. And then you can just twirl it all around, and it's like this whole beautiful little weird landscape. And you can kind of imagine... wandering around on there and going up this hill or getting stuck in this valley. It's great fun.
I gather that you're between assignments, George.
How did you guess? I submitted my Lightning article on October 1st when it was due, and I don't think they've even looked at it yet.
Oh, yeah. Well, National Geographic moves at a stately
got a long
glacial
lead
pace.
time, yeah. But they did pay me right off the bat, so...
Geographic. It moves at a
geologic
pace.
No, that's a class act.
You're playing with sinusoidal waves on Mathematica, and I'm watching reruns of Lost.
I am too.
That's something.
Hey, how far have you gotten?
Oh, you are?
I finished season 5.
Well, I'm just behind you. I'm on, I think I'm at the end of season 3.
I just became voraciously addicted.
Yeah, it's.
First I was watching it on Hulu.
Right. Yeah, I'm doing Netflix.
Which is, Hulu's amazing. And then I got to where Hulu, they don't have the entire 5th season, and neither does Netflix. So I actually purchased the last few episodes from iTunes.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, right. God, it's just like the ultimate cliffhanger.
It is. It's
Can't
funny.
wait for January.
Well, because I just went through the whole series of Battlestar Galactica, and the differences are interesting. I mean, I love Battlestar Galactica, but I think it's more coherent. It's more realistic, really, even though it takes place in outer space and has warp drive spaceships and all that stuff. But it's about real people and real situations, and it's about government and the relationship between democracy and the military and labor disputes in a society that's in crisis. And whereas Lost is just one damn thing after another, but it really keeps you on the edge of your seat.
And for a while, see, at the point where you are, I think I was beginning to wonder if this was going to be like that old David Lynch series, Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
Where it's not actually going anywhere.
Right. Yeah.
And it makes you realize, I mean, you kind of have the illusion when you watch these shows that the writers who all sit in some room someplace in Los Angeles have this all mapped out in their minds. They have this godlike platonic view with which they can look down on the past and the future of the series, and then they're just letting it slowly unwind. And then, of course, actually they're making it up as they go along.
Right.
But the extent to which they're doing that is never clear. And, with David Lynch, it was almost a parody of the process, because you finally realize that this wasn't going anywhere.
It's, all those writers are probably they're all souped up on real neuroenhancers and just letting it rip series after series and just trying to come up with something to titillate and entice us week by week.
They get the good stuff.
They do.
But by the time you get through season 5, it starts seeming like a lot of the little weird things they planted, they actually come forth again and tie some things together. So I'm liking it more and more.
Uh-huh.
But for a while it was reminding me of that, that famous thought experiment from John Wheeler in which he's trying to explain it from bit.
Which experiment was that?
You wrote about it in End of Science, the one where you play 20 questions.
Oh, yeah. The surprise...
We've probably talked about this before.
The surprise version...
So basically, yeah.
The surprise version of 20 questions where you don't decide what you're thinking of until the person asks the question, and then your answer has to be consistent with all the previous answers. Yeah.
So you go out of the room, and the guy who's the player doesn't know what you're doing. So you say, we're going to go out of the room, and then we're going to decide on what it is we want you to guess, and then you'll come back and ask us questions with 1 or 0 yes or no answers.
Mm-hmm.
So you go out of the room, and then you tell the other people that, well, actually, we're not going to think of anything, like an elephant or a bread box, or we're just going to use this. This procedure. So whenever he asks the question, the first person, just say anything. Make it completely random or arbitrary, anyway. And then don't necessarily be thinking of anything, or think of something, because we'll all be thinking of a different object.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he asks the next question, another person can answer, and as long as it's consistent with the first answer. So if he asked, is it larger than the solar system? And the person just arbitrarily said yes. And then in a later question, he asks, something that would contradict that. Mm-hmm. Then you wouldn't answer. You'd answer no.
Right.
And then eventually, after going back and forth, he'll decide what the object is. But he's actually created the object himself by asking the questions through your random answers.
So profound.
So this was kind of what I was.
So profound.
It's neat.
And disturbing.
You explained it a lot better in your book. And
I don't know. It's very postmodern.
That's what Twin Peaks seemed like to me, and then I was starting to think that that's what Lost was starting to be too. But now it's converging.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, don't give anything away. I've got a long ways to go.
No, I won't. It's really tempting to do so, but I won't.
Hey, listen, before I forget, although I love this, I love shooting the shit with you, George.
Yeah, we're 15 minutes in, and we still haven't really gotten around to the matter at hand.
We're sort of like our own little lost episode here, right?
Yeah.
So
I feel pretty lost. So, what else have you been up to?
Making it up as we go along. So I've got this thing. I've talked about it on Blogging Heads before that I do at Stevens through the Center for Science Writings, which is this lecture series that I run, and there's some other stuff too. But it's called the Green Book Award, and I give it out every spring for a book published in the previous year that addresses environmental issues in some compelling way. And I need nominations, so I'm appealing to the Blogging Heads audience to give me titles of books that have been published this year, 2009, for the first time, about the environment in some way. So just to give you a sense of what books have won in the past. Last year we gave it to Commonwealth by the Columbia economist Jeffrey Sachs. So Commonwealth is kind of end of poverty plus global warming, basically, and sustainability. And the previous year it went to these two kind of heretical environmentalists, Nordhaus and Schellenberger, who wrote a book about the need for the environmental movement to embrace science and engineering and technology. And before that, Edward Wilson got it for the creation, a book about how appealing to Christians to help scientists preserve biodiversity, the environment, and so forth.
Right.
And I can't, I've been sort of Googling around trying to find books, and I think there's something interesting going on. I've got a few names of books. Actually, a couple of these came from Andy Revkin, the New York Times environmental reporter. One is a book called Why We Disagree About Climate Change by a scientist, a British climatologist named Mike Hulme, a very distinguished guy, apparently. And it's about the different ways that people perceive the environment and how this diversity of attitudes makes it difficult to come up with a coherent policy. There's another book called Whole Earth Discipline by the old hippie Stuart Brand.
Oh!
And this is... So Stuart Brand, I knew he's one of the people who's sort of on the left, green end of the spectrum, who's been saying that we need to embrace nuclear power to counteract global warming in the future. And this book, this new book...
There was a really good book about that came out, it was a year or two ago from... I'll have to try to think of the title during the hour and mention it.
On nuclear power?
Yeah, right. But again, it was environmentalists embracing nuclear power and...
What I like about this book by Brand, actually it seems similar to the Nordhaus Schellenberger book, but he's saying again that the green movement has to get over its reflexive opposition to technology and big business and those sorts of things. And it sounds like a good message for my school. Brand is a really good writer, an original thinker. But I'm hoping that maybe there's some other books out there. But it's interesting that I hadn't read anything about I hadn't seen any reviews, heard any discussion about either of these books, and I think it's because
I haven't either.
The publishing industry is probably burned out. Well, the public, and hence the publishing industry is burned out on books about global warming and the environment.
Yeah, it just goes back and forth. Yeah, Eugene Linden had a good book on global warming that came out last year, I think. But yeah, there's just been a lot of that, real saturation of the subject. And
Eugene Linden, I used to know him. He was married to the daughter of the old New Yorker writer Brendan Gill, and I was.
I didn't know that.
And years ago, I was friends with a guy named Charlie Gill, who was Brendan Gill's son, who went out with a friend of mine, Sarah O'Neill, who's the sister of Lisa O'Neill, who's married to Bob Wright. And anyway, through these family connections...
This is all part of the East Coast literary media establishment.
I guess so. And as a result, I met Eugene, 25 years ago or so.
Yeah, I met him not quite that long ago. He was out in Santa Fe for... Something to do with the Santa Fe Institute. I think maybe he was interviewing Murray Gell-Mann for something.
Uh-huh.
And I think I had him over for dinner.
Yeah.
God, let's see. Winds of Change.
Winds of Change.
Climate, Weather, and the Destruction of Civilizations. But that wasn't published this year, so that wouldn't be eligible.
Ah, okay.
I'm a judge this year for the Los Angeles Times Book Award Science category.
Really?
And I have a whole pile of science books that keep, they just show up, in bundles at my front door. And I can't think of anything on the environment that's, that might be a candidate that's really stuck out at me. But I hadn't been thinking in those terms. I'll paw through the stack and see if I can make a nomination myself.
Well, again, I think it just shows, the problem going way back, writing about climate change, global warming, and so forth, and Andy Revkin has talked about this, is how you keep sort of freshening it up. And making people care about it. And one route is to scare the shit out of people, but that's irresponsible. On the other hand, if you try to write something that's really nuanced and reasonable, then that's going to be boring.
I would still love to read something that just really did a good job of taking a climate model, just like you might try to explain how a television set or a computer works to a layperson, that just starts with one of these climate models and then just walks you through it step by step, so you really come out understanding what the assumptions are that go into it and where the variables can be tweaked, like what the knobs are. And I don't know if that would make a book, but it would make a great magazine article.
Yeah, I think a good person to do that, a person who would be interesting to listen to on that would be Freeman Dyson, except that he's become really controversial because he's not questioning global warming so much as he's saying that maybe it's not a bad thing. That maybe it will actually lead to a burst of human creativity that will create a net benefit for humanity.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of, it was sort of the same way that people reacted to Thomas Malthus and the whole Malthusian idea that population was growing exponentially and food sources were growing linearly, and actually, Malthus was completely right. He just didn't anticipate the discovery of the Haber-Bosch process for fixing nitrogen from the atmosphere.
Right. Or of birth control.
So I guess that's kind of where Dyson's coming from. We'll discover the equivalent of the Haber-Bosch process, and then. But I can't see Dyson, actually doing the nitty-gritty explanatory journalism it would take to walk someone through a model like that.
Well,
Andy Revkin could do it, but
that's true.
Or what's our friend's name? Michael Lemonick.
Oh, right.
Sudden blank moment. Yeah, Mike Lemonick. He's working now for an environmental group, and when I talked to him on Science Saturday a few months ago, we got into that. The lack of some really, really good dissection of one of these models.
Right. Because Yeah, because those are so crucial to establishing climate change. On the other hand, there's a hell of a lot of observational evidence now. Melting of glaciers and movement of different plant species and so forth.
It's just so difficult, if it's even possible, based on what's happening over a few, the current years, to extrapolate. But if you could really get a feel for some of these models, it would help. People. But that's the thing. People don't really respond to those kind of subtleties, and they'll get a really, like last week we had the coldest week. It was the end of October. It was the coldest week in October I ever remember. It got, sub-freezing night after night. There were days when it, barely got above freezing. Mm-hmm. And, I can imagine people saying, yeah, well, what's all this global warming stuff,
Right.
And then this week, it's been getting into the mid-60s every day, which is also off scale. So
we had snow here, I think it was a month ago. We had snow in early October, so it didn't stick to the ground down where I live near the Hudson River. But I have a friend who lives 4 or 5 miles from me, who's up on a hilltop, and he got so much snow that when he came home from work that night, his kids had built a snowman in the backyard. This is like October 10th.
Yeah.
Hey, I remember last year, for the first time since I've been playing, we played hockey on Thanksgiving weekend.
All right, I remember that. Yeah.
Go figure.
Yeah, I think we did a Thanksgiving show, I think, and talked about that.
That's right.
Yeah, along with tryptophan and other Thanksgiving topics.
Right.
But so people, they're affected by these immediate little, basically meaningless, short-term experiences like that, and then it's so hard to get people to think, on the larger scale. It's the same problem with getting people to really believe in vast eons of geological time, and the inability to do that, gives rise to, just the persistence of these ridiculous young Earth creationist theories.
Do I sense a segue?
Hey, did you see Ken Chang did an article on Islamic creationism? He went to a conference somewhere in New England in Science Times, and the only thing that I wanted to remark about that was that while they do have creationists in Islam, apparently they don't have many of the young Earth creationists, because even the real extreme equivalent of creationism there recognizes that the days in Genesis or in the Old Testament or in the Koran are actually metaphorical for 1,000-year chunks at the smallest. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I didn't realize. I didn't. I have encountered Muslim students in my classes who, and it's interesting because these are kids who are majoring in engineering and science, but they, when we talk about evolution, they reject the idea that humans are an evolved species. But you're right, I haven't encountered the equivalent of young Earth creationism.
Ken's point was basically, and the point of this conference, I guess, was that the thing that really bothers people there a lot more, which is also true here, is the idea that we could possibly, be descended from these primitive ape-like creatures and that we're related to chimpanzees. That apparently goes over even worse in Turkey than it does in the Midwestern United States.
Yeah, it is incredible, the resistance to evolution. I've just been teaching. Yesterday, I'm teaching this history of science and technology class, and we talked about the Darwinian revolution, the publication of Origin of Species, and what led up to that, and the voyage of the Beagle, and so forth, and then the controversies that dogged Darwinism for a while, like the fact that Lord Kelvin and other physicists said that there was no way that the Earth was old enough for some of these changes to occur in the way that Darwin had described. That was before the discovery of radioactivity, but also the huge gaps in the fossil record. But then by the 1930s or so, you also had the synthesis of the theory of evolution with genetics, with Mendelian genetics, and it all fit together really nicely. You had population biology combining with that, and so the theory itself was put on this really solid ground. That you had the gaps between other apes and humans filling in really nicely, the discovery of Australopithecines and Homo habilis and Homo erectus and all that. And here we're still arguing about whether it's real or not. I mean, it's just incredible.
Yeah, and people, we're still, while there seems to be a shortage of books that catch on about climate change, books on evolution, or like Dawkins has a new one out, right?
Yes, The Greatest Show on Earth.
Show on Earth. Our
mutual friend, I'll hold it up. Not that Dawkins needs to be plugged by Blogging Heads TV, but it's already on the bestseller list, of course. Our friend...
you reviewed that, right?
Yeah, John Timpane at the Philadelphia Inquirer asked me to review it. I don't know if it's run yet. I'll have to Google it after we get off. But
Dawkins has written so many of these books, and what did he still have to say that he hadn't said before?
Well, he actually calls this book his missing link. He says that his books have been about... So Selfish Gene was a new interpretation of the theory of evolution by natural selection, and was focusing on genes as the primary unit of selection. Dawkins...
That's just the most stunning... When I first read that, I was just blown away. Like, I'm not sure I've ever been blown away by a book. It's so great.
Right. So he's also got... He's got other books that focus on different aspects of that evolution, like the improbability of certain physiological organs, like the eye. How could the eye...
Oh, yeah. Climbing Mount Improbable, I think, is where he does this real tour de force.
Right. And there's a lot of overlap between that and The Blind Watchmaker, which directly confronts the argument from design that goes back to William Paley. Is it William Paley?
Right.
In the early 19th century. He says that what this book is supposed to do is just... His other books assumed evolution as a given. And so he wasn't trying to justify the basic theory of evolution by natural selection. So in this book, he's trying to marshal the basic evidence for evolution. It's typically and with very strong rhetoric. So Dawkins says some things that have already stirred up a lot of controversy, not just among religious people, but even among those who are very sympathetic and who certainly believe in the theory of evolution, like Nicholas Wade, the New York Times writer, who reviewed the book for the New York Times. So Dawkins says that evolution is no longer just a theory, if you want to put it that way. He says that it's a fact that has been overwhelmingly demonstrated, and he actually distinguishes evolution from natural selection, the mechanism of the primary mechanism of evolution. And he says that natural selection hasn't quite achieved the status of a fact, but virtually so. And he compares people who deny evolution to people who deny, for example, the Holocaust. Or actually, he's got an even better analogy. He says that it's as absurd to deny evolution now as it would be to deny, for example, that there was a Roman Empire.
Right, yeah, Nicholas mentioned that in his review, and I thought that was great. Just imagine, like what biology teachers have to put up with, and if a history teacher, had to get really nervous because he started talking about the history of the Roman Empire, and students were saying, well, we don't think any of that actually happened.
Right.
That that modern man was created by God, just absurd. I mean, of course, the Roman Empire existed within biblical time, but it was a great example.
Yeah, I like that too. More than the Holocaust denial is intended to enrage people, and as a result, I think it sort of creates more smoke than illumination. I like the analogy to the Roman Empire because when it comes just to sort of modification of species over time and the overall chronology of the history of life, I mean, it is, and evolution, even as we can observe it today, in, for example, the evolution of certain pathogens in response to antibiotics. I mean, it's so overwhelmingly obvious that evolution is real.
Right, and nothing comes close.
Right.
and no, I mean nothing. No, there is nothing else in science. And then if you pop up a level to metaphysics, and you want to take a completely mystical intelligent design, the intelligent intervener, that's one thing. But there's no competition. It's true. And then where Nicholas, I guess, really got some readers mad was, I mean, it's an overwhelmingly positive review, but then later on, you don't want to, just sound like you're a complete cheerleader. He chides Dawkins for saying that evolution is a fact.
Yes.
He's saying, no, it is a theory. And the point is that, a theory, is like the highest, greatest, most attainment in science.
Yes.
I mean, a theory isn't a hypothesis, and the whole use of just a theory is ridiculous. I mean, it's just like saying just a fact, almost. I mean, for something to be admitted into the realm of theoryhood, it takes years and years of testing, of being confirmed and jiving with the whole, structure of science, just like you were describing a while ago, all the different sciences that come together, and how evolution by natural selection just so brilliantly fits into this. And and to me, saying it's a theory is just like the ultimate accolade. And so it's stupid to say just a theory. It shows a real profound misunderstanding of what a theory is. But then Nicholas, and I think I would agree with him, would say that that doesn't mean you go one other step and say it's a fact. And
well,
I wrote an essay about that a decade ago, and I got a lot of flack for that. Like Nicholas got from his review from Daniel Dennett and from who was the
Philip Kitcher,
historian of science? Kitcher, yeah, right. And they were saying, well, Nicholas Wade himself doesn't understand philosophy of science and all the subtle different meanings of theory and fact. But I read both of those letters, and I just thought they were kind of saying in the same way, just using different terms and different rhetoric, what Nicholas Wade was saying in his review.
Right.
And what I said a decade ago.
I think I disagree with you on this because
I know you do.
I think that evolution should be considered a fact in the same way that heliocentrism is a fact. I mean, it seems to me that
no, but heliocentrism's a theory.
Well, but then I would agree with it. So what Dawkins said in his book is that, and he actually has different definitions of theory. He's got two primary definitions.
Okay.
One is theory one, or definition one, a scheme or system of ideas or statements held as an explanation or account of a group of facts or phenomena, a hypothesis that has been confirmed or established by observation or experiment, that has been confirmed or established. Now that, to me, suggests that it can be accepted as fact. The second sense is, and this is, so when you were talking about the high status of theory, I'm of course thinking of things like multiverse theories and string theory.
Theory is used loosely by both sides. That's a good point.
That's right, and some of the things that we talk about, I think, so heliocentrism, to me, isn't a theory anymore. It's an absolute fact. I guess we're just getting into semantic hair splitting, but
I mean, I take your point, though, that we do need to distinguish between something like multiverse theory, which isn't a theory in the way that I was just saying, but it's obviously called that, and evolutionary theory or heliocentric theory. So that's a good point.
Well, to me, the point what the distinguishing point is whether or not a proposition about the world can conceivably be overturned in the future in a dramatic way, or whether anything can conceivably be overturned, but it's just silly to me to think that the basic model of the solar system that we have from Kepler and Copernicus that overturned Ptolemy will be overturned in the future in as dramatic a way. I think.
Yeah, but
it's
I'm
just
not sure that should be the standard. But go on.
It's not going to happen. In the same way, evolution, meaning gradual modification of species through time, which you can see in the fossil record, it's buttressed by what we know now about DNA. You can create parallel trees of life with DNA analysis that match the fossil record very precisely. It's just as inconceivable that basic fact of evolution, apart from actual mechanisms, will ever be overturned. So that, to me, gives it the status of a fact.
Yeah, but whenever you start calling... a theory is a framework of knowledge, and, a fact is, a unit in a theory. Or a fact is explained by laws, and then laws are explained by theories. There's different ways to think about it, but... I know, to me, if you start calling a theoretical edifice, no matter how solid a fact, you end up, really treading on a dangerous line of having scientific ideas become dogmas. Because the whole great thing about a theory is that it's testable and it's malleable. A fact isn't malleable. A theory is malleable. So we can have evolution through natural selection, but there could possibly be some tweaks as far as, the process of natural selection and how much of it is purely random and how much there might be the kind of organizational laws that people like Stuart Kauffman and other perfectly respectable theoretical biologists talk about. So it's always up in the air, it's always being tested, it's always subject to at least slight modifications, and that to me means you shouldn't call it a fact.
But there's a
foundation.
You should
revere it as a theory.
There's a factual foundation to it, and especially to
but you're still...
the basic idea of evolution. This is important to me just because I hate the idea. I just talked about this with my students yesterday. We talked about whether intelligent design should be taught in the classroom and should be presented as an alternative to evolutionary theory, and the students most of them seemed to think that intelligent design should be presented as something that was basically religiously inspired. It certainly didn't have any substantial basis, but they also, most of them were
it's not a theory.
Were insistent that evolution should not be presented as something that had been proven by science. And
that's not. I don't agree with that. Yeah, it's been proven, and to the best that we can prove anything. But that still always leaves a little of that exciting uncertainty, which is what makes it science. So to me, if they're going to bring intelligent design into the classroom, it should be to compare it to evolution and show what a scientific theory is, and show why intelligent design utterly fails as a scientific theory, and it's just a dogma.
I agree with that. It's just what I'd like to try to persuade my students and even my colleagues in journalism and philosophy and science that it's okay to say that some things have been established as facts. So we've got the Big Bang Theory, which is as controversial and debatable in many ways as the theory of evolution is. So Wade, I think, talked about group selection, for example, and where does natural selection work its magic, and so forth. In the same way, with the Big Bang theory, you've got debates over dark energy and cold dark matter, and what created the first the Big Bang in the first place.
Right.
But the basic, I think you can say that it is a fact that the universe is expanding and was smaller and hotter and more dense in the past. I think it's not as established as evolution is, but it's so well established that I think it approaches the level of fact. But then you've got parts of the overall theory that are much more ambitious in what they say about how the Big Bang happened and how it's unfolded over time. And then it's completely appropriate to talk about it as speculative, tentative, can be overturned in the future.
Yeah. I don't know. I just think it'd be great to get people, the people in the trenches, your average people, of which we are among them, to just really have a better understanding of what a scientific theory is. And maybe to do that, we should really be more careful and chide people for calling superstring theory a theory instead of the superstring hypothesis or the multiverse hypothesis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But again, maybe we're just arguing semantics. But to me, just getting that idea of the dynamism of science across is really kind of damaged when you start calling a theoretical structure a fact. But
yeah.
I mean, maybe you could pop out of the whole system, and really discover, like the people that Bob wrote about in Three Scientists and Their Gods, that at the very basis of the universe there really is some sort of algorithm, some kind of simulation, and there's like a completely deterministic simulation that's viewed up at our level of abstraction as quantum mechanics, for example, or even evolution by natural selection, with arbitrary natural selection, and that this is all kind of coming out of some great algorithm that could conceivably be understood. I mean, it's a long shot, but
and is this some kind of Laplacian?
It's what keeps science exciting. But of course, now we're in this, in the political arena. It's advantageous to be able to call it a fact and not use the word theory, because people just so badly misunderstand what a theory is. And in that regard, you can see it. But I guess I would suggest that we teach people what a theory is, and that should be the emphasis rather than calling a theory a well-established theory of fact.
I think it's pretty obvious from
this is getting tedious, isn't it?
I think it's pretty obvious from this exchange between Nicholas Wade and two professional philosophers that you're not going to get any consensus on this.
No. Yeah. Kitcher's letter was really good, and what you said earlier before about the parts of a theory, like evolution through natural selection. I guess you're saying Dawkins admits that may be just a tiny bit away from being accepted as what he calls a factual theory, while evolution itself is unassailable.
Right.
That's an interesting
That's what he's saying, and I would draw the analogy to the expansion of the universe as a factual, as one of the kind of bricks of knowledge that forms the foundation of the Big Bang Theory, and then you've got all the stuff on top that people are arguing about, and maybe forever.
Yeah.
But
we'll agree to sort of disagree, but I think in essence we're. Hey, in one of your emails, you mentioned that in Dawkins' book, one of the big things he takes on is essentialism.
Oh yeah, that was. I really like that discussion. Essentialism is a word that I've tried to revive a little bit. I've blogged on it at least once, and how the debate, for example, over whether warfare is a product of our biology often falls into the trap of essentialism. So essentialism is sort of old-fashioned philosophical term which suggests that different things or creatures, and especially humans, whether individuals or races or the whole species, have a certain kind of core characteristic. And when it comes to, and Dawkins says that essentialism goes back to at least to Plato. So Plato is saying that all the varieties of chairs, for example, in the world, all are these imperfect reflections of the Platonic ideal of
the
a
perfect chair.
Yeah.
There was actually an architectural kind of mini movement called essentialism.
Oh, really?
Where someone actually made the essential Platonic chair.
And what did it look like?
I can't remember, but it just, you just looked at it and you go, yeah, that's the chair. I mean, change anything in that chair and it's not quite the Platonic chair anymore.
Well,
so yeah, it's an old idea. I mean, a whole Western strain of Western philosophy is kind of built on it.
Yeah, and the old Christian notion of all species being created de novo by God is an essentialist idea, and so what's really radical about the theory of evolution is that it completely demolishes essentialism, and if you really understand the theory, you realize that that species are never fixed, that they're very dynamic, always changing, even in the present.
So species is really an artificial human construct.
Right. And what I like about this...
It's kind of an average or summing over of a bunch of different characteristics that are in flux.
And what's interesting about this to me is that some of the worst abuses of Darwinian theory and also genetics have involved essentialism in some ways. So the Nazis, for example, have said that there are certain races that have an essential character or nature, and that it's either bad or good in various ways. And of course, the Aryan race, their essential nature was superior to that of every other race, and therefore we should breed more of them. In the debate over war and human nature, you sometimes get these really simplistic essentialist notions about how chimpanzees are essentially violent, especially chimpanzee males. Human males are essentially violent. Then you get the counter-argument, no, we're essentially peaceful and gentle and...
like the bonobo.
Yes. and
pick your essence.
And so I love that Dawkins brings up essentialism as as something that is in complete opposition to a true understanding of evolutionary theory, especially since sociobiology and eugenics and social Darwinism have been so essentialist in many ways.
How so?
Well, in the ways that I just mentioned. So sociobiologists in sort of the caricature.
Oh, I see. Saying that there's an unmalleable human nature,
right? And
even though the human nature did arise through evolution,
right? Yes, but that
they're saying that it arose because of evolutionary constraints, over the millennia. So in that sense, it's not essentialist in the Platonic sense, where we were created in the image of God, and the kind of essentialism that the creationists are buying into.
Well, if you sort of take Dawkins at his word, even to talk about human nature is a dangerous proposition, since human nature is something that's constantly in flux, and we're nothing if not adaptable. And human history shows how malleable we are. And I think some of the worst excesses of modern genetics, evolutionary psychology, behavioral genetics, and all that are essentialist excesses. They say that if you have this or that gene, that means that you have this or that characteristic. So anyway, I was really happy to see that. At the very end of his book, this is something that I mentioned in my review. I think it's a wonderful book. It's really, this guy, it's unfair how gifted he is as an explainer. He's just almost unnaturally clear in the way that he explains even really complicated technical topics like molecular DNA clocks. But at the very end, he obviously wants to have a big crescendo for his book. And he says, the fact of our own existence is almost too surprising to bear. So is the fact that we're surrounded by a rich ecosystem of animals that more or less closely resemble us. How is it that we find ourselves not merely existing, but surrounded by such complexity, such elegance, such endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, which is an allusion to the end of Origin of the Species? The answer is this, says Dawkins. It could not have been otherwise, given that we are capable of noticing our existence at all and of asking questions about it.
That's nice.
No, it's not nice, George. It's the anthropic principle. It's my least favorite pseudo-scientific explanation. It's a circular tautological argument. It's not a...
Yeah, it doesn't mean it's not rhetorically beautiful.
Oh, it is beautiful. That's what bothers me about it, is that most people will go, oh, wow, that's so eloquent, even though it's completely vacuous.
Yeah.
It could not have been otherwise, given that we are capable of noticing our existence at all.
Yeah.
I mean, after this...
What would Stephen Jay Gould have said?
He'd say, there he goes again, or, this...
Yeah, right, with a different jot or a tittle at the very beginning during the Precambrian explosion. We, or anything like us, or anything like human consciousness would not exist. I mean, I actually find that a lot more exhilarating.
Yeah. There's...
I still love we are flukes of the universe.
Yeah, so Dawkins is anti-essentialist, but what he is what I like to call an inevitablist. Meaning... Yeah,
right. That was, his big bone of contention with Gould.
Right. And I think it's a real flaw, and I think it comes from... he's always got those damn creationists in the back of his mind. And the creationists basically are saying, well, God, I don't know, life just seems too weird to have been created by natural selection, just with, laws of chemistry and so forth. And so Dawkins is trying to show that no, things are actually highly probable or even inevitable if you look at them in the right way.
Okay, I see what you mean.
And of course,
and also he's got all the religious people saying, oh, it's just such an impoverished view of the world you atheists had. You and I got that a lot 5 years ago when we were in Cambridge for that Templeton Science and Religion Journalism Fellowship.
Yeah.
The religious people saying, oh, but it's just this, impoverished, barren view you atheists have of reality, and it just ain't true.
Right.
We can wax as poetic as anyone and be as overwhelmed by the beauty of nature and the mystery of life. And,
yeah, absolutely.
But then Gould would say, there's a huge argument in evolutionary theory. I mean, in true, scientific terms, evolution is not directed in the sense that, it would be directed by, someone like, whether it's the Catholic Church or the Dalai Lama, who believes that there's some kind of, spiritual guiding principle that, that directed evolution in certain directions, even if it's not an interventionist kind of manner in which, a fundamentalist Christian might believe. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, you can believe as a scientist that there's a direction towards increasing complexity, and then if you rewound the tape and played it again, that you'd get something a whole lot like us, or at least something that was sitting around and thinking the same kind of stuff.
Right.
While Gould would say, that's not true at all. So there is just the kind of fundamental difference in which, very serious scientists can be on two sides of the fence on this very important deep question about evolution, and it's something that may be unresolvable. It can just be a meta science question, but it seems conceivable that a lot of people would say that there's more and more evidence and coming down on the side of increasing complexity, but a lot of people would disagree with that.
I completely.
That's the great thing about theories.
I completely agree that there are. This is what I told my class yesterday. Even I gave a diatribe, same one that I just gave you, about the fact of evolution. But I said that, and then I addressed the question: why are we still arguing about evolution? Why are there these persistent doubts, not just among religious fanatics, but among really intelligent, well-educated people? And I think it's because all evolutionary theory and all the rest of biology and physics, all science as a whole, leaves some huge questions unresolved about the origin of life, the probability of life, the probability of the trajectory of life once it got started that culminated in us here. There are so many questions about how this happened and whether there was any probability or inevitability to it, and I think that's why. Life is still absolutely mysterious when all is said and done by the scientists.
Yeah.
And that's where there will always be lots of room for religious faith to come in. Even if it doesn't, you don't have to disagree with evolution at all. You just have to say it's or evolutionary theory. It's just incomplete. It leaves all these great
like
questions.
any theory is going to be incomplete.
Right.
And the only thing that can be complete is a self-consistent constructed belief system, and you can have any number of those because they're so unconstrained,
right,
because they're not theories.
Yeah.
So, it's it's endlessly interesting to talk about.
Here we are.
Hey, before we burn up too much more than an hour, I wanted to bring in the Claude Levi-Strauss.
Oh.
There was a great obituary of him in the Times last week, and of course the big news, I think, to most of us was that Claude Levi-Strauss was still alive until last week when he died at the age of 100. And
he was 100 years old?
He was 100 years old when he died.
I'm Googling him. I tried to... I contacted him and was going to I just Googled Levi-Strauss, and of course I got all the dungaree ads. Was he related? Was he related?
Yeah. Claude Levi-Strauss, 100 dies. Altered Western Views of the Primitive, quote unquote, by Ed Rothstein, who's really great.
Oh yeah,
great writer, critic.
I was going to interview him, as part of this profile series I did for Scientific American back in the 80s and 90s, and it just never happened. He had even though he's quite old then, he had such a busy schedule, and the reason I wanted to interview him was because I could never really understand his writings. And I wanted to try him to explain to me face to face what the hell he was talking about when it came to structuralism and things
structuralism.
Like that. Yeah. What can you?
Yeah, but structuralism seemed really hard until we got post-structuralism, and then it
and then
it became kind of the established thought. I was wondering how this fits in with essentialism, because Levi-Strauss is basically saying that. For one thing, I think his big point was we have to have more respect for what we've been calling primitive societies, that these people are as intelligent as any other people. They have these complex belief systems and structures, and that so he was against essentialism in the sense of saying that there was some Western essence of man as the great intelligent being, and that these were primitive tribes. But on the other hand, it seems like he was essentialist in the sense of structuralism, and saying that there was a structure to human thought and human behavior that bound the most primitive Brazilian tribes that had never seen an electric light and are just suddenly discovered out in the middle of the Amazon with the most advanced European societies, that that there's a structure to human behavior, there's a structure to rituals, there's a structure to myth, and that this all kind of brings us together. And then later, the post-structuralist reaction seemed to be condemning that as a kind of essentialism and saying that there was, a fixed human nature, rather than infinite malleability. That's how I took it.
Well, that makes more sense of it than I did actually reading his books. He was not somebody who saw. He didn't really see evolutionary theory or genetics as important contributors to anthropology, I take it.
Yeah, it wasn't really, I don't think, his interest. And I guess one of the criticisms, some people viewed him as kind of a dilettante. As a young man, he spent all this time in Brazil and experienced. He wasn't a thick description type anthropologist like
Clifford Geertz.
Like Clifford Geertz, but in the great French Parisian tradition, the grand theorist, he's sometimes criticized for just taking, fairly limited amount of information that he, as an outsider, could get, and then establishing this grand theory. And of course, there's also been a reaction against that whole thing in anthropology, against grand theories, and then in favor of just accumulating a lot of details, which doesn't seem like science to me. But it was just interesting to kind of remember this guy. I realize now for more than 15 years on the shelf next to my bedstand, I've had a copy of Levi-Strauss's book, Tristes Tropiques.
I've got it too.
And I think I read about 150 pages, and, I was really, taken up with the story because it's very much of a kind of an intellectual travelogue as he goes to South America. But I've never finished it, and it's just been kind of sitting there with its orange cover, sort of taunting me for all these years for not actually having read Levi-Strauss.
I think of him as there's a certain class of French intellectual, Foucault, or what's his name, Baudrillard.
Yeah, and Derrida.
Yeah, and I think of them as poets more than intellectuals, because I read them, I don't fully understand what they're talking about, but I always feel they produce a mood in me that I like, a kind of mystification that. I have a sense that I'm in the presence of a great intelligence and a kind of visionary, and I like sharing their perspective a little bit, even if I don't completely grok it.
I don't think anyone does, including them.
Yeah, probably.
But, structuralism came out of linguistics, Saussure and structural linguistics, and the idea that everything is kind of based on oppositions.
Yeah.
And all these interesting ideas that, like, a unit of sound or a phoneme isn't actually, it's not a fact so much as it is it's a construct. And different languages actually have different basic sounds that, well, just like getting the Japanese, to pronounce certain consonants in English and vice versa, obviously. But, and then I guess a lot of Levi-Strauss's structuralism was based, it was all based on oppositions, the raw and the cooked and the sky and the ground and things like this. And this interesting notion that if you take myths from all over the world, that they tend to have this very similar structure.
Yeah.
And then the post-structuralists were just kind of, rejecting that as being, that suddenly became the conservative right-wing establishment. And actually, there was a great quote from Levi-Strauss that's kind of saying what you were saying. He would have agreed with you. This is in Rostein's obituary. It says, "French society, and especially Parisian society, is gluttonous. Every 5 years ago, it needs to stuff something new in its mouth. And so 5 years ago, it was structuralism, and now it's something else."
Well, I admire him for being so self-deprecating. It's interesting that you just don't hear him discussed anymore. It seems to me that there was, linguistics then produced Chomsky, and there's the Chomskyan school. In fact, that's pretty much the only school in linguistics now. And then in anthropology, it's dominated by well, it was by sociobiology, now by evolutionary psychology. And so structuralism did turn out to be a dead end. Very creative and evocative, but whether or not it can even be called scientific is
maybe not a dead end. I mean, it doesn't contradict, I don't think, a lot of things that are coming up in more modern scientific evidence-based kind of anthropology.
Yeah.
But anthropology's always kind of hovered on the brink of between being a science and being a humanity.
Right. I like it better when it's more of a humanity, like Clifford Geertz is. But again, it's for aesthetic reasons. I just love to read Geertz. He reads like a novelist. So whereas some of the evolutionary anthropologists are just boring. Everything, the theory just kind of crushes, it reduces everything so much that it takes away all the interesting quirks.
Yeah, this older writing, there's just kind of this constant sense of inquisitiveness and tentativeness, which seems very appropriate considering the subject
yes.
ourselves.
Nobody has a clue, let's face it.
Yeah.
Hey, we're at a minute.
Well, anything else we wanted to...
We're at an hour and 10 minutes, man. I think
about?
We should save... we can talk about the flu maybe next time we talk.
Oh, that's right. We didn't get into the flu. Yeah, let's save it till next time.
Okay.
Yeah. Are you getting a flu shot?
I don't know. I have to... I don't know. I think I want to hear what you have to say about it.
Yeah, okay. I'll wait to get a flu shot until our next talk, but we should probably do it soon.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, John.
All right. Take it easy, George.
Good to talk.